Welcome to BUEI Talks, Island SOS. I'm William Campbell, your host for today's presentation. This 8-part series focuses on innovative, sustainable ocean development initiatives in island nations around the globe. Each presentation will cover a different island and topic, and will highlight the unique perspectives and involvement that islands have on ocean conservation, and it will showcase the different practices that they've undertaken to safeguard their surrounding ocean. BUEI appreciates the generous support of Chubb Bermuda, the exclusive sponsor of this series. And Island SOS aligns with Chubb's mission to promote a healthy and sustainable planet, to strengthen the resilience of communities, and to protect biodiversity against the effects of climate change. Today is our third Sustainable Ocean Strategy presentation, and today we're focusing on the island of Jamaica. This Caribbean island has a lush topography of mountains, rainforests, and reef-lined beaches. Home to nearly 3 million people, it is the third largest island of the Greater Antilles and the Caribbean. And like Bermuda, it is an upper middle income country with an economy heavily dependent on tourism. It enjoys press freedom and democratic governance. And Dr. Theresa Rodriguez-Moodie, the executive director of the Jamaica Environment Trust, or JET, has led the organization's environmental advocacy program and spearheaded projects geared towards the protection of Jamaica's natural resources and public health. Today, she's going to share some of the challenges inherent with public engagement and participation in shaping environmental policy and law. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Moodie to the stage.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hello, Dr. Moodie. I wanted to ask first, we've got some young people in the audience. I was wondering, with your long career already in public engagement with the environment, is there any specific advice that you would give to young people or students who are looking to pursue a career in your field?
The first thing I would say is try and get some experience by volunteering. I think it helps you to get a better feel of what it might entail. And you can do so many different things in environment. And so I would suggest starting with volunteering. I did it in a few different organizations, and it really opened my eyes to a whole different world. So that would be my first my advice for young people.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And if we may, Dr. Moodie, I believe we're going to hear a presentation from you today.
Okay. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Theresa Rodriguez-Moodie, and I am the CEO for the Jamaica Environment Trust. It is truly a great honor for me to be able to share with you today and hopefully to add to this discussion. Now, as I speak about JET's lawn advocacy program, which focuses on both marine and terrestrial environment, I am going to highlight three main points. The importance of passion and conviction. The second one, advocacy takes careful thought, time, and energy, but it is a powerful tool which can result in varying actions. Three, you don't have to be a big organization to have a big impact. But before we speak about JET, I want to tell you a little about my Jamaica. Jamaica is a small island developing state in the Caribbean, and we are known internationally for our beaches, Duns River Falls, our coffee, reggae music, Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, among others. And our economy is dependent primarily on services, including tourism, agriculture, and industry. Jamaica is beautiful, but much of our landscape is now marred by human influence. And as we become more developed, we grapple with issues of poor solid waste management, pollution of coastal waters, damage to coral reefs, poor air quality, and deforestation. As you can see some of the images in the photo. Now, JET has a three-member staff right now. We're going to add a fourth shortly. We have an active and talented board and a varied membership of over 50 individuals and corporations. It is a not for profit environmental NGO, and we are based in Kingston, and we were formed in 1991. Our mission is to protect Jamaica's natural resources using education, advocacy, and the law to influence individual and organizational behavior, public policy, and practice. Now, we try our best to respond to issues impacting the environment and Jamaicans once we are aware of the concerns. The words of Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist, really captures JET's origins, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about now. The events that make your blood boil reveal what matters to you. Anger rises when your core values are in jeopardy. JET's founder, Diana McCauley, was often taken as a child to the Palisados Tombola, as you can see here on the image. And this is just outside Kingston. And this is where her love for the natural world was planted. This strip of land is about 4,000 years old. It protects the Kingston Harbour, which is the seventh largest natural harbour in the world, and is the base for one of Jamaica's two international airports. And more recently, it was declared a protected area and a Ramsar site. Now, in the late 1980s, Diana took a house guest. So fast forward a couple years later, Diana took a house guest to the Palisados Strip, the same Palisados Strip, to watch the sunset as she had done in childhood. And the beaches, unfortunately, had now become more like a garbage dump. And she was really appalled by the construction waste that she saw, the old refrigerators, the tires, and plastic. And she felt ashamed and personally violated. Now, this piqued her interest now in the environment, and she started to read, read, read. And then sometime after, Diana saw a story on the pollution in the Kingston Harbour. Here is an image with pollution just right uh, by the Kingston Harbour. She then had an opportunity to visit three of Kingston's sewage treatment plants, which were in various stages of dysfunction. The Riverton Waste Disposal Site, which is Kingston's primary dump, which is not a landfill, she also got an opportunity to visit. Now, these images of pollution and degradation, what with the so-called brown issues, became the focus of the newly formed Jamaica Environment Trust. And to this day, JET is the primary environmental advocacy group in Jamaica, still focused on these issues and often referred to as Jamaica's environmental watchdog. Diana's anger and outrage gave birth to JET. And she couldn't comprehend in what universe was the devastation and the destruction that she had witnessed on the environment. Okay. And as noted right at the start of this talk, passion and conviction are very important. Advocacy work is a big part of what we do because in all of this, we are advocating for our children's future and our fundamental right to a healthy environment. Our efforts are usually focused on a combination, as I said right at the beginning, of both the marine and the terrestrial environment. And importantly, we work very closely with communities, advocating on their behalf, providing them with the necessary tools to advocate for themselves as well. The decision, however, to work with the community was largely reactive. They would first come to us, and we simply do not have the capacity to take on all the brown issues Jamaica faces. All advocacy is at its core an exercise of empathy. Now, recently, JET received complaints from the people of Gibraltar St. Anne, that's in Jamaica, where bauxite mining is actively taking place. Now, I have lived in Jamaica all my life. I knew bauxite was mined, but I had no idea what the people who lived close to the mines or the factories were subjected to. The community had several mining pits and when I visited in was it October of last year, I was just appalled by what I saw. I couldn't fathom living in such conditions with constant noise, dust, and destruction to the environment. And this led me to speak out on social media about what I had seen. My blood was boiling. Now, we knew the social impact was far greater than the economic benefits of the bauxite alumina industry. But we had to ask the government, how was this okay? How was what the people in the community were experiencing, how was this okay? Now, this social media outburst, I just have some snippets of it on the screen. It resonated with many actually, and it resulted in numerous opportunities to speak to the media, raising the level of awareness on the issues. We subsequently sent multiple letters to the relevant agencies and media houses, raising the concerns about another pending environmental permit for further mining in the area. Jet and others expressed concern with the flawed environmental impact assessment, that's the EIA, and we made strong suggestions for what should be done. Unfortunately, the environmental permit was still granted, but instead of the permit being for the original 6,000 hectares, it was now reduced to approximately 1,300 hectares. And while not a victory, we had made some progress. We were being heard. And I just put up a couple of snippets of some newspaper articles that ran the stories. Additionally, advocacy takes careful thought and energy, but it is a powerful tool. Passion and conviction, as I mentioned earlier, now they are important tools in advocacy, but they cannot stand alone. Advocacy is not free of risk. It must be guided by careful thought and it requires strategizing and sustained energy. Now, all this time I've been talking about advocacy and what it needs. Well, more like what it needs, but I haven't actually defined advocacy. So, what is advocacy? Advocacy involves any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends or pleads on behalf of others. Advocacy takes patience, it takes courage, passion, and stamina. It is goal directed, but it brings about change. It is organized and strategic. And very importantly, it involves others and engages the media. And as I said, it is a powerful tool. Now, importantly, at JET, we seek to protect Jamaica's natural resources by strengthening the capacity of communities to protect their own rights. So it's not just us advocating for them, but they need to be able to advocate for themselves because this is key. Working closely with communities is central to all our work. We believe it is important to not only advocate on behalf of the communities, but also empower them to advocate on their own. And so we train communities to use the media to engage a wide audience with their concerns and to argue for good environmental management. Now, we have also strengthened community capacity via workshops and other types of interactions focusing on their legal rights importantly. We have brought many community members and regulators into direct contact with each other. We've trained them, for example, to test air quality as well, to review environmental permits, and we've explored avenues to affect decisions such as the public meetings. That's for us here in Jamaica. Now, over the years, our advocacy efforts over the years have led us to create material to help others. So it has led us to create guidebooks mainly for the community groups. So, following our work in communities on several issues, in 2015 we got some funding and we produced the Get Up, Stand Up guidebook on the laws and rights relating to, specifically in this instance, mining and quarrying in Jamaica. But we also produced Stand Up, Talk Up, which was a general introduction for advocacy for Jamaican communities on a whole. Now, these practical tools help improve community participation in local and national discussion and activities. But a major hurdle faced in communities is this fear of victimization, especially when the environmental problem is caused by a private sector company and is a source of jobs in the community. The fear of losing jobs or being singled out in the community as a reason why an industry decided to leave the community. In such cases, members prefer JET to do the advocacy for them. Nevertheless, despite this, community organizations must be strengthened. JET has much experience with community groups that started out strong and then weakened and sometimes even disappearing by the end of the project. Now, weak community groups, they will not deliver good results, whether advocacy based or otherwise, and it takes time and money to strengthen them. And this is not always possible to include in project proposals. JET also uses the public participation process to review environmental impact assessments. So apart from just working with communities, these are some of the other things that we do in terms of advocacy. We attend public meetings, we review national policies, and we focus very heavily on regulatory issues. This is such as the poor enforcement, insufficient monitoring, lack of compliance, failure to respond to public concerns. And in fact, we have filed 4 successful legal actions against the government of Jamaica agencies. In 2 cases, we were joint applicants with affected communities, and this was Pear Tree Bottom and Harbour View. Remember, I spoke about the importance of community and including community, and these were 2 cases that we had community involved. In Jamaica's constitution, all have a right to a healthy environment, and much of JET's work arises from the concerns of individuals and communities whose right to a healthy environment are being impacted. Now, the Harbour View sewage treatment plant is an interesting case. Here's where you have a pipeline from the plant leading right into the sea. Now, this plant, it services a large community at the entrance to Kingston. It was built in the 1970s. It then stopped working in the 1980s and is operated by a state agency. Now, for over 20 years, the plant spewed raw sewage into the Caribbean Sea, wreaking havoc on the marine environment. Now, for just over 10 years, JET worked with the Harbour View Citizens Association to collect evidence of the plant's lack of maintenance. We wrote dozens of letters and we attended meetings. But when JET suggested legal action, the community balked and the campaign fell off. However, in 2009, 3 younger community members showed up at JET's office to explore possible actions. And they were prepared to put their names to the court action. And they actually managed to convince other citizens in the Harbour View Citizens Association to be an applicant. Or rather, they managed to convince the association, my apologies, to be an applicant. JET then filed suit against the National Water Commission, the National Environment and Planning Agency, which is our environmental regulatory agency, and the Natural Resources Conservation Authority. And at the time, we had a full-time attorney on staff. 3 weeks before the trial date in 2010, the state agency, which was National Water Commission, requested a meeting because they wanted to settle the matter. Now, a consent judgment was obtained stating that the state agencies had failed to perform their duties, their statutory duties, in respect of the Harbour View treatment plant. And the NWC was required to construct a new plant, which was now completed in 2015. And on court instructions, JET, along with the community members, regularly visited the facility during construction. JET continues to visit the facility to this day to monitor compliance and report issues to NEPO, which is the Environmental Regulatory Authority, and the community members are integrally involved in all of this. Another point I wanted to speak about is that advocacy also works better when groups join forces. Another story is between 2013 and 2016, the Jamaica Environment Trust led a campaign to protect the two goat islands, they're called goat islands, from the construction of a large logistics port and hub. Now, these islands are situated in the Portland Bight Protected Area, which is Jamaica's largest terrestrial and marine park. And another non governmental organization, the Caribbean Coastal Area Management Foundation, CCAM, they were the park managers. Now, JET had long experience with public advocacy, but not CCAM. And furthermore, JET, we were based somewhere else, so we were seen as an outsider, while CCAM had strong community relationships that they had built over many years. The two organizations worked out complementary strategies for this type of partnership to work. So JET did most of the media interface, developed the creative materials and website to hold information for the press, while CCAM supplied JET with images and facts, introductions to community leaders. They led the local tours and they commissioned the original research to support the campaign. The Save Goat Islands campaign was ultimately successful, and the plan for the logistics hub or the logistics port and hub was abandoned finally in 2016. Advocacy, as you can see the time frame, it doesn't always yield overnight results, but it is a powerful tool. Not only do we use the law in our advocacy work, but we also advocate for the creation or modification of law and policy. Now, this has varying levels of success. JET has done a lot of beach cleanups, for example. We've done a lot of these cleanups over the years. And since 2008, we have been the national coordinators for the International Coastal Cleanup Day. And the data that we have collected over the years led us and others to advocate for a deposit refund scheme and a ban on certain types of plastic. After several years, finally, the government of Jamaica in 2019 implemented the plastic ban on straws and plastic bags of certain sizes, and there is now a voluntary deposit refund scheme for two types of plastics, type 1 and type 2. The beach cleanup data since 2019 shows a significant reduction in plastic straws and bags. But as you can see here the image, but plastic bottles are still the number one item found on beaches and in our marine environment. Our beach cleanups also led us to develop what we call a solid waste management public campaign known as No Dirty Up Jamaica, which in English means Don't Dirty Up Jamaica. And this ran for over 6 years and it focused on public awareness. For years, we have been advocating also for EIA regulations, and this is one of those stories that has not been very successful. But in 2011, we prepared a paper on the drafting instructions for EIA regulations. Unfortunately, to date, we still do not have the regulations, but we do have guidelines. But we continue to push for these regulations. I understand now that they're actually being prepared and should be prepared within maybe the next 2 years. So you see, advocacy takes time. As I said, it's not overnight. Importantly, advocacy, it needs money. Now, advocacy work, it doesn't fit easily into a project framework because one, it's long term. Two, results are sometimes hard to measure. And three, it's not often clear what caused what. For example, while the beach cleanups have become a national movement, we can't definitively say it was the reason or the cause for the new regulations. We do know that it contributed, but you can't say for sure it is the primary reason. JET's advocacy work is supported by unrestricted funding, and this is important. You know, membership fees, donations from individuals and corporate groups, events, sale of products, for example, or interest from our endowment fund, which we have built up over decades. The reason why unrestricted funding is so important is that it allows more flexibility to respond to community complaints because it's not tied to a project, right? It allows us to review multiple reports, to submit reviews with other project along with the other project specific work that we do. And this type of funding also gives us the ability to hire people. Sometimes, if only a few are doing the advocacy work, they burn out quickly. And so you need bodies, you need people. And then also sometimes we are able to hire skills NGOs often don't have, such as your filmmaking, your messaging, your social media, your marketing. So, importantly, advocacy needs money. However, any kind of advocacy attracts criticism. And JET was often described as an elitist group, or as we say in Jamaica, uptown, not living in real Jamaica, against economic progress, tree huggers. JET's advocacy strategy was was new to me personally when I joined JET 10 months ago. Being constantly in the public face, speaking up strongly against actions or decisions being made by the government and corporations, being so much in the public face is scary. At least it was scary to me. And since I started leading JET's advocacy efforts these 10 months ago, I have found it everything I described before, needing the passion, the conviction, the time and energy. And yes, it is emotional and exhausting, but it is also rewarding, not from public appreciation, but knowing that we have been able to effect change. Every step matters, every word matters. But the work, it is so, it's sometimes so much for the small group we are. Remember, I said, we're three. Nevertheless, you don't have to be a big organization to have a big impact. Margaret Mead, an American anthropologist, says, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Now, in Jamaica, we have a saying, we little but we talawa. It means, though we are little, we are strong. Jet's work in Jamaica is Jet's work is only in Jamaica, but it spans the entire island, 14 parishes. And as mentioned earlier, we only have the three members of staff, and at our largest, we have had about nine full-time staff members. Still, not a large organization. Despite this, you've heard me mention the media. We understand the importance of the media, which we leverage to bring attention to the work we do, especially in our advocacy efforts. And our efforts have led to several successes over the years. Some I've mentioned already, but I also want to highlight another successful campaign, the Save Cockpit Country campaign. Cockpit Country, for those who are not very familiar with Jamaica, is a unique landscape in the central part of Jamaica, as you can see on this map here. It spans about five parishes: St. Anne, St. James, Trelawney, Manchester, and St. Elizabeth. It is also a biodiversity hotspot. So it has a high rate of plant and animal endemism. It is a source of six major rivers and 40% of Jamaica's water supply. And it was identified as an area of protection from as far back as the 1950s, but it remained unprotected despite the threat of bauxite mining. Now, in 2006, JET learned that prospecting licenses for bauxite had been issued over much of the region, much of this important landscape, and we joined forces with other local groups in advocating for the protection of this important natural resource. This involved engaging other NGOs in the area as well as communities. Numerous community meetings over several years was our main strategy for encouraging engagement. Remember, I spoke about the importance of engaging communities. Now, the initial efforts were focused on identifying a boundary for cockpit country, A media campaign entitled Save Cockpit Country was then launched in late 2006, and numerous meetings were held with policymakers. Let's fast forward to 2017. See how many years have passed. We've gone 2000, it started in the 1950s, we've gone to 2006. Let's fast forward now to 2017. The Prime Minister announced the designated Cockpit Country Protected Area boundary in Parliament. He also indicated that, the short is CCPA, would be close to mining. Unfortunately, so this is a designation, so it's not legally protected yet. Unfortunately, the boundary was not the boundary that the what we call the Cockpit Country Stakeholders Group, the CCSG group, and this is really a combination of environmental NGOs, community groups, and members of the public that made up this group. And so it was smaller than what was proposed. What was proposed was about 116,000 hectares, and what was designated was about 76 to 78,000 hectares. But JET considered this a foot through the door, And so our advocacy efforts continued. We didn't just stop there, we didn't just accept that. Now, getting the formal protection took almost 5 years. So just the other day, in March 2022, last month, the Prime Minister finally announced the area as now legally protected and close to mining and prospecting. And this is not because we sat and waited, JET and others had put continuous pressure on the government to have this area legally protected. It wasn't enough to just have it designated, we needed it legally protected. Now, as I said, the area, it still omits about 30% of what was proposed by the CCSG, which is that a group of NGOs and members of the public, and it does not have a buffer zone. And many of the communities have been left out of this protected area. So you can see, let me show you on the screen, we have the yellow boundary, which is the CCSG boundary that was proposed. And then in red, that's the boundary that was finally put forward as the Cockpit Country Protected Area. So, as I said, many of the communities have been left out of this protected area and are now, unfortunately, exposed to the impacts of mining. So while there has been some success, this is still a work in progress for us. And it was a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens that brought this about. And this is the largest terrestrial protected area ever declared in Jamaica, which is over 78,000 hectares now. So in conclusion, we have seen a significant shift in the attitudes towards the environment. 30 years ago, when JET was just formed, the environment was rarely spoken about and often met with harsh and sometimes personal criticisms. Now there is a much greater appreciation for the environment, and while this is good, it does not always match the decisions we see being made by our government and regulatory authorities. And while much progress has been made, much more is needed. Advocacy and the use of the law played an important role in this shift of attitude. As mentioned earlier, advocacy takes patience, it takes courage, passion, and stamina, but it is a powerful tool to effect change. It is goal directed, it is organized and strategic, it involves others and engages the media. Now, we have seen the value of using law and advocacy. Unfortunately, we don't have a lawyer on staff at this time, but hopefully we'll be able to have one in the future. Nevertheless, we continue to use the law and advocacy as we live our mission in protecting Jamaica's natural resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Moodie. I'm sure all of us watching certainly learned a lot and certainly felt a great deal of encouragement in your words. Just before we turn over to audience for questions as well, I'd just like to ask, what parts of public consultancy do projects that are proposed, such as mining, generally avoid? You mentioned that there are usually environmental impact statements that go along with projects, but in what kind of ways do projects seek to avoid the public process and oversight?
When you say seek to avoid it, you mean avoid, or are you trying to include it? Include
Not
it, you mean?
to an extent, yes, but with understanding that they need to be that communities must be advocated for. In what's
Well,
in what
okay.
regards are they usually not consulted?
So, you know, we have environmental guidelines, but we don't have environmental impact assessments. But the guidelines do encourage, once there is a project that will potentially have an impact on the community, it does encourage the project proponent, to consult the community. But as I said, it's a guideline, so it's not something that is a requirement. And there's really nothing that is in our regulations, in our legislation, that says what type of projects do require to do an EIA. So this is oftentimes just something that is at the regulator authority can choose to say which project needs an EIA versus not, but it's not, there's nothing clearly that documents that process. And so sometimes the public can be excluded.
Would you say that there is a space perhaps for advocacy in making sure that environmental protections are more strictly followed by regulatory authorities?
Oh, for sure. This is something that we do. And this is why, some people I've heard criticize Jet, like, why are you reviewing EIAs? Well, we're reviewing EIAs because we want, it's our right. It's our, being a part of the public, it's our right to review it and to ensure that also the community that might be impacted, that they are made aware, so we try and help them to understand what it also means. So we have been advocating for these regulations to include a public consultation process. um, as I said, it's, we're not there yet, so we're not at the regulation stage, but we have heard that it is likely to be done within the next couple of years. But we've been hearing this for a while, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Moody. I'm going to turn over to the audience for a couple of questions now. Good.
Sure.
Good afternoon, and it's lovely to be here. And thank you, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie, for your presentation. I'm actually representing, along with two of my colleagues here, the Jamaican Association of Aged Champion One. But my question is, I saw the view of the harbour with all the plastic, and I'm just totally horrified. And I wonder, you mentioned that there are community engagements, etc., because clearly the three people on your staff, or the 10 as it was, couldn't do all the cleanup. So what community engagements, sort of have you deployed to try and clean up the harbour? And do you have a current picture of what it may look like even now, or maybe you can share it?
Okay, I didn't hear all of that question, so I don't know if you can, since you're closer to the mic, if you can tell me what was said. I
Yes,
heard parts of it.
perhaps more so along the lines of what's seeing as how the job clearly was quite a bit bigger than could be filled by 3 to 10 people. What engagement with the community was undertaken to directly clean up those areas that were worst affected?
Okay, so I'm not sure if this was in relation to a specific. I heard something about the Kingston Harbor. So what we have done is always working. So we have volunteers as well. We work with volunteers however possible, and sometimes the volunteers are technical. They're technical experts in their field, and they will help us, providing us with expert opinions, or the information that we need to help with a particular situation. And in the instance of, I think it was the Harbour View, um, the sewage treatment plant. We worked also with an organization. We had some assistance from some organizations overseas, law organizations that supported us with 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 the best approach, the best legal approach for how to deal with a particular situation. But despite, as I said, despite the fact that JET is a small organization, we couldn't do what we do without the help of not just the community groups but our volunteers that really help us to build the numbers to get things done. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, I just wondered what it looked like now, since.
Oh yes, the rest of the question was, what does the Kingston Harbor look like now? Does it still look like the picture you showed?
The Kingston Harbor it looks a lot better. There was a time when in the 1970s, 1980s, when we would have been advised not to, even in the 1990s, not to go in the harbor, not to swim in the water because of the water quality. Now there are much more sewage treatment plants that are operating and are now not just discharging untreated sewage, but they're actually discharging treated sewage. So that's into the harbor. So the quality of the water is a lot better. I wouldn't necessarily say it's great to go and have a swimming, but the water quality is a lot better. We are struggling with solid waste management, however. Jamaica has a big solid waste management problem. So whenever it rains, we often see a lot of solid waste from our gullies, which is the primary route that the garbage comes. It normally goes right into our harbor. So JET also, along with other groups, we're often cleaning up the beaches along the Kingston Harbor. So while we may not be tackling the solid waste issues head on, I mean the sewage issues right now, we're still monitoring it, but one of our biggest challenges is the solid waste management issues.
Afternoon, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie. I was just wondering what kind of work you were doing, if any, on the harvesting and consumption of seafood.
The harvesting and what of sea what? Sorry, I didn't get that part.
And consumption of seafood. So in terms of like anything, seafood, yeah. So anything around overfishing or whatever.
Oh, okay. So, okay, right. A few years ago, we worked. We weren't advocating for a ban, but we were advocating for the control of, in terms of eating parrotfish. I don't know if you know parrotfish, that beautiful fish. In Jamaica, we love it. I love it personally. It's a nice fish. But we recognized that they were being overfished, and I mean, I remember I was in Trinidad and I was snorkeling off of their buco reef, and I recall seeing a parrotfish, and it was a massive parrotfish. And I was wondering, I didn't know it was a parrotfish at the time. And I remember asking what type of fish that was, and they said, "Oh, that's a parrotfish." We don't get parrotfish like that out here, and that's because we've been overfishing it. And while we didn't ban it because there was going to be an impact, we recognized the impact on the fishers and the community that depended on it. We there was a big campaign, and one of the big seafood companies, they joined us. So they no longer sell the fish. You won't see the fish really sold in many restaurants. Fishermen still sell it, but people are a lot more conscious of it. So it didn't come as a ban. We didn't advocate for a ban, but the message was sent, and it's still there. We don't actively do the messaging around that anymore, but it's still, having worked with a lot of kids, young people, I think that also had an impact. But we are also working on a project right now on ghost fishing, ghost gear rather. So that's when we have, abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear out at sea, and that continues to overfish. And it is a problem. But we're working specifically in the Kingston Harbor. It's a small grant in the Kingston Harbor and around the Keys, and we're looking at that because it is affecting. In some instances, it does contribute to the problem of the continued fishing, and of course, the fishermen don't benefit from that. And we have the fishermen actively involved in discussions around this issue, but more really needs to be done with fishermen and the whole issue of overfishing. But we take it, as I said, we're a small organization, so sometimes we have to take the issues, one at a time.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie. We do actually have some comments and questions from the online community, so I'm just going to ask those now. One of our online comments was, JET has a huge positive environmental impact on Jamaica over the years. So we definitely have some online supporters listening today, which is really nice. And one interesting question was, how important is having a lawyer involved? Can people get things done without the knowledge in law?
Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, and right now we don't have a lawyer, but we do have a lawyer on our board, an environmental lawyer, and so that helps us to, bounce things, issues off them. You don't have, advocacy. You don't need to have a lawyer do it, but it does help because their knowledge of the law. I mean, law it can be very complicated, as I'm sure you know. And I have done my reading, and you sit down and you read the legislation, and you read the regulations and so forth. But when you have a lawyer, you really can go a lot further. You understand a lot more the role, or the options that you can take in a particular case. And so while you can advocate for something, you can do things without a lawyer. The knowledge of the law, by understanding a bit of the law and how it works, having a lawyer is even more important, I think.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie. My name is Joan Richardson. I'm a Jamaican living in Bermuda. What can be done better in Jamaica to help in terms of getting rid of the waste properly, like to recycle? Is there a big project, a big push going on to recycle? I think
All
that
right.
might.
Okay, I think I heard you were asking about the issues of solid waste and recycling, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Especially recycling.
Especially what?
Especially recycling. That's
Okay.
my pet. So much of it is seen in the ocean.
Yeah, it's a really big problem.
And I watched your cleanup yesterday. I saw clips on the news last evening. You guys are doing a very good job. Jeff is doing an excellent job, I must say. But I think more hands on deck are needed. I'm sure you recognize that. We can get the communities more involved, the whole 14 parishes, for instance, more involved in everything you do. Maybe more ads on the radio, social media is great nowadays, really get the word out. And congratulations on, having to, downgrade the mining, because I think that played a big role as well. When the people came out, like we always say, numbers are great. We get together, there's more will be done. There's strength in numbers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes. Okay, so you would have seen, as you said, you saw we had a cleanup yesterday on the Palisados Strip, And there are a number of initiatives right now in Jamaica. I would say mostly focused on in Kingston, because it is a city. I think there's a heavy focus there. And we have people sometimes ask us, why do you do beach cleanups? And we say we understand it's a band-aid, but we it's still critical because it's almost the last chance before that waste enters the marine environment. And we think it's important to collect this waste so that it doesn't get into the stomachs of birds and fish and so forth. There is another project that is trying to trap, and this is not our project, this is one by the ocean cleanup, and they're trying to trap the waste at the mouth of the gully. So when the garbage comes down in the gully, it's trying to trap it, and then there is a like a boat that comes in and collects that garbage, and then they sort it and carry some to the dump and some for recycling. But you remember I mentioned the No Dirty Up Jamaica campaign, and that's a public education and awareness. While all of those initiatives are good, the behavioral change is needed. Yes, we need to stop, generating. We need to stop firstly producing plastic. There has to be a better alternative because it doesn't degrade, doesn't biodegrade. But also in terms of the behavior of disposing garbage, we have a tendency to, if I just discard it, I don't see it, it's no longer my problem. So we have to get back to that place of understanding the importance of not disposing things in the way, in the improper ways in our gullies. um, so it is a combination. We have, as I said, we have a voluntary deposit refund scheme. So that's where it's not per bottle, it's per pound, where persons can come in and drop off their plastic bottles, and they can get, you know, money for it. It's not a whole lot of money, but you see communities are getting involved, and they are, some of the vulnerable groups, some of the women in some of these communities, they are going and they're collecting the plastic and they're depositing it and getting some cash. And so it does help. They're not getting as much plastic as they would want to, and some more, this means more people need to get involved. But you know it's some more advocacy, more awareness has to happen around that. But we want to be pushing the issue of better disposal, better collection, and having those persons that are involved in the generation of the plastic to find alternatives to using plastics.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie. We do have one last question from the audience before I hand this back to Will. And that question is, how involved are young people in JET's efforts?
Well, the Gen staff is young right now, and you have to be young. You have to have a lot of energy. A lot of our volunteers are young. Actually, a lot of high schools are requiring young people be to have a number of hours voluntary service. And so oftentimes we have students in our office. It is as simple as going through the newspaper to cut out relevant articles. Sometimes it's filing, sometimes it's data, collation, everything, because it's, as I said, right now it's three of us, sometimes it's four. But everything, all of that effort, it does help. And young people, they are interested. The other day we had a young person in the office, and we had to create some flyers for this cleanup that we did online, social, not printed flyers, but it's beach cleanup that we were doing. And she was totally bored with cutting out these newspaper articles. And we said, you know how to use Canva? And she's like, of course, I can do all of this social media stuff. And so we had her creating some graphics. And so they like being involved in different ways. And oftentimes, like the things, our beach cleanups, we have a lot of young people that come out and assist.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez-Moodie. I'm going to finish up the questions there and hand it back over to Will.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Dr. Moodie, for answering the questions that we had today. I'd like to thank you again for sharing how the Jamaica Environment Trust manages the process of public engagement and participation in the environment and the island's environmental policy and law. It is our hope that your presentation would inspire and encourage discussions throughout Bermuda and other island communities as well.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to have shared with everybody here today.
Thank you. We'd also like to thank Chubb Bermuda, the sponsor of our BUEI Talks Island SOS series. And we'd also like to ask you to join us next month on May at 4 p.m. when the focus shifts to the Barbados beach management and habitat restoration with Carlos Giles from the National Conservation Commission. Thank you so much. I'm your host, William Campbell.